Valerie with MyStitchinDolliverse, and in this video we are going to be making this cute dress for Ellowyne Wilde based on a kit that I made. And if you're new here, I teach people how to sew for your dolls, and I talk about dolls, and I also make and sell kits so you can sew for your dolls. So are you ready? Let's go.
My Ellowyne Wilde kit comes with embroidery floss, needle, pre-cut garment and snaps. You'll need pins and scissors. This is the front piece of the dress and the two back pieces. And we're going to be sewing them together at the shoulder seam first. And you'll repeat this with the lining. We will be sewing these together by hand, but of course you can do this on machine as well. So I am going to be using a back stitch, which is my favorite kind of stitch for sewing pieces together. And as you can see, I take a little bite of fabric, and once I pull it through, I go backwards and I meet up with that stitch that I just did. And where the needle comes out is equal to where that thread is I'm pulling. So you go back, you go in, meet that other stitch, and come out on the other side of where that thread is coming out. So I'll show you again, and I actually double up my thread, put it through the needle together. It makes it a little bit stronger as well, not just using one piece of thread. And you can use embroidery floss, which is included in the kit, or you can use sewing needle thread if you have that. And you can see I'm going backwards, taking a bite, and I can readjust it as needed, and I'm coming out the equal amount on the other side of that thread. So you want to take smaller stitches as well so that your seam is going to be strong enough. And this is how I finish off the thread as well. I go through one of the last stitches like that, and then I go through the loop and I tie it off. And it saves on bulk with the stitches as well, so you don't have a big fat knot at the end. And then you can just cut it off as close as you can to the thread. Repeat on the other side, and you can see how the stitches look different on one side or the other. And then what you want to do is press open that seam. You can finger press it, or you can press it on an iron. So repeat the shoulders on the lining piece, and then put them all together, right sides together. Make sure that the shoulder seams match up on both the arm's eye and on the neckline. And you want to mark where your stitches are going to start on the center back piece on the lining. Then you want to hand sew the lining on the armhole, and then hand sew from the center back skirt all the way around the neckline. And you want to just start at where you marked it on the lining, which you will have a marking on your garment. And we're still going to do that back stitch all the way around. And the next step is a little bit more tricky, but once you get it, you will understand why it's really important. But we are still doing that back stitch all the way around. And now that you have sewn all the pieces together, we're gonna trim and clip. So it's important to trim those corners off. They just add way too much bulk when you turn your garment right side out. And I am clipping into the neckline because it's a curve, and you also clip into the arm's eye, which is also a curve, because once it's turned right side out, it's not gonna lay right. It's gonna pull funny. I also went back and I trimmed out some of that seam allowance. There was just too much. So I'm using a chopstick, and I am pushing through the center back pieces through the shoulder seam. So both the lining and the center back piece are going through that shoulder piece and coming out the other side. And once you pull both pieces out, take the chopstick, poke it in there to the center back neck piece where that point is. And then I take a pin or something small, like even the needle, and I pull out the extra seam allowances like that. You have to get really in there and just be careful not to pull out the seam, but you should be able to do it pretty precisely and it'll give you a sharp corner right there. Next, we're going to sew together the side seams. So you are sewing together the lining side seam and the dress side seam, matching the underarm seam allowances. So right there is the seam allowance intersection, as you can see, and we're going to pin that right there. And even if the fabric doesn't match up perfectly, you really want that to match up right at that intersection where the seam is. It makes it look so much more professional and nicer, and it lays better. Then you can sew together the side seams of the lining and the side seams of the dress, and there you go. So all you have now left to do is the center back piece. So the same thing with the center back, you are matching up that intersection of the center back lining piece and the center back of the dress. There is the opening of the center back of the dress where you'll put the snaps and the doll will get inside of it. But then you have your lining piece that you need to sew from that point down and the dress that you need to sew from that point down. And so they all match up in this one intersection, and you want to lay all the pieces out so that the seam allowances don't get caught up in each other. You want to really just stab stitch it through that intersection and get that piece really strong right there, because a lot of tension is going to be on that center back piece, getting the doll in and out. And it's a little bit of a tight fit, so you don't want it to rip. You want to be able to sew that really well at that intersection. So you can see I am starting to do my back stitch on the lining piece. So the lining piece does not go all the way down to the hem. It only goes to about the hip area. And I am doing the back stitch coming up to that intersection. And it might be a little hard to see, but what I am going to do is come out right where that intersection meets the back of the dress piece, and I am back stitching a couple of times in that spot to make it strong, to reinforce it. And then I'm going to be moving the seam allowances out of the way and not sew them down flat and not get them all squished up, because what happens is that it twists the dress and it kind of acts weird. So I'm going to stab through the seam allowance on the lining piece, and I'm going to come out on the other side without smashing that seam allowance. See that? And then I'm going to sew on the other side and just kind of reinforce that spot, particularly where the opening of the dress is going to be. And I'm even opening up that back piece, and I am making sure I am sewing through every piece of that garment at that intersection, making them come together really nicely, not smashing down any of the seam allowance. And then I can continue on sewing the center back of the dress from the hip area down to the hem. So I've just pinned it right at that intersection to show you the opening of the dress, making sure I didn't tuck anything weird. And it seems to work. And I sewed the rest of the dress all the way down, and we're going to turn it right side out. That's the lining, that's the dress, that's the intersection right there. We're going to turn that skirt down, and you can see how it turned out. I love this dress and I love this print. So you just need to press it really well and try it on the doll next. Here's Ellowyne Wilde. She's laying down, trying on the dress. It was tight getting it on her, but once it's on, it fits really well. I'm going to put 2 snaps on the back and do the hem next. So here's the dress, and what I did was I twice hemmed it, so it's about a quarter inch, and pressed it on the ironing board, and now I am slip stitching it. So I am going right along that fold of the fabric of the hem like that, taking that bite, and then I'm taking a teeny tiny bite, just a few threads of the dress, and repeating that over and over. And I do it an even amount between the stitches. I would say closer to 1/8 of an inch, just whatever looks right at this scale. As you can see, I'm taking a bite and a bite of the dress, and I am using white thread just so you can see what I'm doing very well. So you can pick a different shade of color of thread if you want to, but honestly the white doesn't really show, and there are so many different colors in the dress, it's hard to match a perfect color. The bite of fabric that you're taking for the hem is so tiny you can just barely see the dots of the thread. So there it is. It's so cute. And you could give it another press and you're good to go. Next, we're going to do the snaps. So for the snaps, they're kind of difficult to hold on to only because they're so tiny. And the way that I do snaps is that I go through each of the holes 2 to 3 times. And you don't want to go through to the outer fabric. You only want to grab that seam allowance that's in the back there. It will definitely snap and close the dress nicely and lay nicely. And so you just go from stitch to stitch, from hole to hole, and you turn it accordingly. Make sure to add the snap to the other side and then one also at the waist, and you're done. There she is. How cute. You can style it however you want to. Make sure to subscribe and we'll sew some more. Bye.